I'm Allison Johnjack, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grant Holly. I'm the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We are very happy to be able to partner with UW Extension to bring you the research needed to be able to navigate our ever-changing environment. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for their valuable time and leadership, the growers for joining us, and Allison for being the catalyst from which all of these sessions rely. Thank you so much.
So welcome to the bonus first cranberry brown bag for the month of March 2025. We had enough requests from the education committee on various topics to be able to have more than fit in just 1 hour in terms of kind of business management content. We've had a lot of questions about H2A labor and other non-domestic labor sources that are, of course, fairly far outside of my expertise. I feel really lucky to have gotten to meet Hernando lately, who's the new bilingual farm labor outreach specialist with UW Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. And he has connected us with Katie Mueller and Elena Guzman, who are going to have even more answers. We do have transcripts on, so if you prefer to see transcripts, you can hit the ... more button and say show the closed captions. As always, questions are very welcome. I think part of the major reason we're having this is so that you can ask questions back and forth with Hernando and Katie and Elena. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question directly or ask the question in the chat. And if you would like to ask a question anonymously in the chat, use the little drop down that says Ask Allison Johnjack, and I'll ask the question anonymously on your behalf. You can also send me a text and I'll ask a question anonymously that way. So we've got lots of question asking options. And with that, I think we'll head on in forward. I think Grant is not able to join us today, but these are co-hosted between UW Extension as well as Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. So thank you to the Growers Association and everyone who participates, especially those on the education committee, to help us choose topics that are useful for cranberry growers, whether or not they're ones that I know the answer to. So obviously in this case, we're welcoming in Hernando Duarte is the bilingual farm labor outreach specialist with Division of Extension. He just started a couple of months ago, but has a lot of expertise already in sourcing labor, has worked more in the dairy industry, so more of cranberries will be less familiar, and so he's happy to learn and interact and get to know us all. Katie Mueller and Elena Guzman are both with the Department of Workforce Development, both in those migrant and seasonal farm worker programs, job service, and H2A and H2B visa programs. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go ahead and hand things over to Hernando.
Okay, everybody can hear me well? Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with this group of cranberry growers, and also we are here also with Katie and Elena, as Allison explained at the beginning. I have the pleasure also to meet them, I think, last month, and I really say thank you, Katie and Elena, for accepting the invitation, because I know you are the experts in the H2A visa. So when Allison requested that information to me, I think I will start looking for resources, and I think you are the right place to be. So thank you very much for accepting this invitation as well, Katie and Elena. So again, thank you very much for your presentation, Allison. So I'm gonna start also sharing my screen a little bit here, and show it a little bit more about what we're gonna talk today.
Beautiful.
Okay, great. Okay, sounds good. So I'm gonna start here. A little bit about my background. So I originated from Colombia. So I had my education there in Colombia. I have my bachelor degree in business administration and also a certificate in management at the University Industrial of Santander, Colombia. So I was lucky to move to the United States in 2002. And so I started working there here for artificial cattle insemination companies as a bilingual training specialist and also with the boots on the ground because I was breeding and doing artificial insemination to cows. So I did it for quite a few years there from 2002 until 2024. At the same time, working with the dairy producers, I was asked about providing more help to human resources. So that's why I started creating my independent consulting firm, specializing more in labor management and human resources services. So as Alison mentioned also, my experience here has been specifically with the dairy industry, but I'm very thrilled to start learning about the cranberry, about the potatoes and our farms here in Wisconsin. So I'm very happy to be here again. There is my email as well. Um, at the same time, maybe before joining the Zoom meeting, I was talking to Allison. I just wanted to share also who is in our farm management program. Most of you, and maybe you have worked with somebody here, like Stephanie Plaster. But again, I just wanted to show that in the management program, we have a team with different expertise. So feel free to reach out to everybody that you think and you consider, and we will be happy to help. And again, today we're going to be more focused in that labor management as well. Um, so again, this presentation and is more most about the H2A visa. So I'm gonna spend only 10 minutes. I just wanted to introduce myself and to in three slides is gonna explain what has worked for me and what I have seen in these 20 years working with the dairy industry. But again, most of the time is gonna be for Katie and Elena talking about this H2A visa. So main thing now is that hiring approach has changed. In the past, the employer usually ask these questions to the employee, like, what do you have to offer to my company? Why do I need to hire you, right? So we are in a different era, working with a different generation. So right now it has flipped. So basically now the employee is asking these questions to the companies, right? What do you have to offer me? Why do I have to choose your company over another company? So we need to change that mindset. And basically, we are right now in the employee seat, right? So that's the main thing that we need to think about how we need to change, how we need to approach when we're going to get a new person in my company. Um, Also, human resources have a lot of topics to cover, right? But I like just to emphasize in only three today, which I think has been bringing a lot of value to my, former customers. Main thing is like we need to have trust and to build trust, right? So for the boss or the employer, if you have to deliver what you promise. So that's the key, right? So whatever you promise to your employee, regardless, maybe getting a new refrigerator, maybe to get a pay raise, whatever you promise, you need to deliver that because that's when people start trusting in you. So I have been an employee as well in the past, and when my superior didn't deliver what they promised, I lost faith in that. So I was disengaged. So this is the main thing for us, whatever you promise, please deliver that. Again, this is the H2A visa. It's a little different because you're trying to get, or maybe part of your labor are gonna be coming from different countries, right? Uh, and so it's a little bit different, but this principle that I have here, 1, 2, 3, pretty much the same for recruitment, right? So make sure that we do the right thing. And even though probably right now you don't have access to the employee because she's in another country. There are different platforms or technology platforms that you can be having the interview with the guys there in their own country. So make sure that you have 2 or 3 candidates. If you're gonna be working with a company that is gonna try to help you to find the people in those countries, make sure that you have access and have an interview with those guys through Zoom meeting, to a Teams meeting. We use in Latin America another app that is called WhatsApp. So that's very, we use that a lot. So you can have maybe an interview with an employee from, if that employee is in another country. I have done it in the past and has worked very well. So make sure that you have 2 options. I'm saying this because, sometimes when the dairy industry, when they were not too many workers, and it's still prevalent right now, right? So basically you hire the first person that, stop at your farm, that's a big mistake. So make sure that we can have access to at least 2 more people. And also when you're going to be hiring, it would be nice to have 2 or 3 family members at the interview, because in that way we'll have different point of view. So recruitment is critical because it's the first step in bringing the right people to your operation. Okay. Uh, Also, the second one is the onboarding process. So this is huge because it's your opportunity to shine and to sell your company to the employee, right? So have a good employee orientation and training, show them around, show the facilities, introduce all the family members, introduce all the employees. And I know this take times, but we need to make sure that we have allocate enough time to do this, because it's our first contact with that employee that's going to be here for 10 months. And what I visualize also as well is like the key for working with H2A visa workers is like to bring that people the next season, right? So we cannot talk too much about turnover here because you're going to have a person only for 10 months or whatever is the season, right? But for me, the key is to bring Hernando next year in 2026. And also, I need to build my reputation in that way. He's going to refer my company to another family members, right? So even though the period is short, we need to do our best in those 10 months. In that way, that person is going to come back next year, right? So when we talk about what is important for the employees, farming has been, you have different generations of the farm has been in business for 100 years, right? So usually make sure that you talk about the history of your farm, because we as an employee, we need to feel secure. So the big example that I usually give, or the other dairies are doing, is like, my, grandfather started this farm 100 years ago with 20 cows. Today we are milking 2,000 cows, right? So make sure that you have a piece of history and you share that history that you have, because that's the way that people say, oh, I'm working for a progressive farm, or even though they are doing something better year after year. So we as an employee, we need to feel secure, right? So I'm gonna be working for a company that is always moving forward, okay? So it's a good thing. You have the opportunity to share your values, your mission, right? Also very important, just set clear goals, expectation. Also, hand out an employee handbook. And with the employee handbook, please don't have to be a 200 book pages, because nobody's going to read it. So try just to have 3 pages with the fundamental that is going to be easy for the employee to understand, and also for you to follow us and track, right? So, and again, you're going to include all the, behavioral conduct, everything, all the rules that you think are important, just put those in the employee handbook. So again, onboarding, very critical. Make sure that you spend enough time in this activity, because that's the way that the person is going to feel welcome. He's going to be included, and he knows who is going to be working for. Okay. Also, big part of having employee engagement and loyalty is communication and training. Maybe you heard my accent is not perfect because I come from Colombia. So I came here when I was 32. So it's difficult for me just to have the best pronunciation for all the words, right? So, but by saying that, you need to establish regular staff meetings and make sure that you communicate with your employees regularly and have consistency on those employee meetings. In that meetings, usually you have to have an agenda and have maybe no more than 45 to an hour long. I understand it's a hard work, and sometimes you have been working for so many hours, so your employees are gonna be tired as well. So what I have found very interesting is like in those meetings, usually we share those meetings with sharing the results of the goals. Specifically for the dairy industry, we set goals for milk quality, milk production. Maybe pick one or two, three key performance indicators that you can gonna show every time and every single meeting. In that way, the guys are gonna be thinking about next month, we're gonna see this information as well. We need to perform better, right? Um, Also, people are coming. I don't know too much about the H2A visa, but I assume that so many people come from Spanish-speaking countries. So make sure also to have maybe an interpreter, or if you have an in-house person that knows English and Spanish, that is huge, right? Because it's when you create value, and that's when you say, okay, you are important to us because I want to communicate in the same language. Remember, those guys are here for a short period of time. So when you have those meetings, make sure that communication is not going to be a barrier or an obstacle. And if you have a Spanish speaker interpreter, that would be great. And the employees will really appreciate that. Also, in those meetings, it's very important to educate and to train your employees, so just speak like something particular about the strawberries, about your industry, and that's trying to connect those guys, because when you share that information with them, they feel valued, they feel important, and they think that you care about their education as well. Sometimes it's a big mistake because people think, oh, this guy, they don't have maybe a formal education. Probably we need to talk about this because it's not relevant, right? Of course, you don't have to be technical, but make sure that you explain about maybe how the cranberry, crops, what different varieties, and share about the industry as a whole, right? So something that you bring their attention and they feel educated all the time. So that is a very important also. And recognition as well, right? So we as an employees, we have the need to be recognized as well. So in the farm that I go to, like, or I used to go to, in every meeting, we have the opportunity to acknowledge the birthday or how many years of service that person has been here, and recognize that people in front of the group, right? So that's another thing that create a lot of value and engagement on the employees. And finally, set your schedule employee reviews. This is another opportunity for talking to your employee one-on-one. You want to let them know what do you think about them, and vice versa. Okay. So again, these are three things that I have found critical when I working with employees and how to lead those employees better. And finally, I just wanted to share here, there was a study and a publication that was done by the Farming into the Future by Centering Farm Workers, done by Sarah James, which actually is part of our team, Anita Adalja, and Rui Poliscastro. So basically, that way they want to know, and they have like 24 different factors or items in there that they evaluated from a scale to 1 to 5. Mean 5 is the most important. So what do employees value? So I just want to focus more in the first 5. So respectful and treatment, right? Effective communication, there's another one. Safe working conditions, clear expectations, right? So that's top of the mind of the employees, and workplace culture. So more than wages and how much they're gonna make. So there is another items that are top in the list. And if you could concentrate in this one, right, you're gonna create more employee engagement. Yeah, people are gonna be more loyal to you. And basically, what I have seen in the dairy industry is family oriented. So you just bring the family atmosphere and you treat those people with respect. I think that's the main key. So again, the list is huge. It's 24 items, but I just wanted to emphasize what really the employees value, right? And communication has to be, again, my message is consistency. If you're gonna set up a meeting, please do it every time, or you have to postpone it, but it's important to show employees also consistency for the management. They need to see consistency from the management team. Uh, at the dairy industry, we always request a lot of consistency for our milkers. They say we need to follow the same routine over and over. You need to milk the cow the same time every time, everybody. So we are asking this all the time to our employees, but sometimes the management is not consistent with the message, or is not consistent with the meetings, or is not consistent like delivering what was promised. And that's when this getting all those are getting this. There is going to be a disconnection in there, so it's not going to be uh, uh, a good thing to see for an employee to see that they're asking me too much, but I'm not receiving the same in the same way. So pretty much this is what I wanted to show very quick. Again, this is very long. Um, Human resource and employee development is big, but today, only these 10-15 minutes, I just wanted to share those pieces that I think I have found very useful for me. With that, I'm gonna switch to Katie and Elena. So I think you're gonna start talking about the H2A visa, which I know most people wants to hear from you. Thank you very much.
And as Katie and Elena unmute themselves, thank you so much, Hernando, both for that introduction on how best to work with people, which is more or less the same information regardless of what language those people speak and what country they come from. Be consistent, share your story, and make sure that people know what's expected of them and are able to engage with the farm in a productive way. I know we've got a lot of people who are excited to learn about how to especially kind of handle H2A processes from within their own farms. And so I know there's an awful lot of paperwork in the world that I don't know as well. So I'm excited to have Katie and Elena. I see you're both unmuted now, so I will be quiet and let you guys get to it.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes, I muted myself, but we can.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure before we get going. Thank you for having us. I'm Katie Mueller with the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development. I'm the section chief within our Bureau of Job Service there, and our section administers state and federal regulations related to the employment of seasonal agricultural workers. One program that we work with is the federal H2A visa program. I have Elena Guzman with me today. She is the Foreign Labor Certification Coordinator, and she works at administering DW's role in the H2A program. So let's get started and learn more about the H2A visa program. Okay, what is here we go. Making sure. What is the H2A visa program? So the H2A temporary agricultural program allows agricultural employers who anticipate a shortage of domestic workers to bring non-immigrant foreign workers to the U.S. to perform agricultural or labor or services of a temporary or that are temporary or seasonal in nature. Employers apply with the U.S. Department of Labor and must provide information regarding the agricultural labor or service to demonstrate the job is seasonal or temporary in nature. The USDOL must then determine that there are not enough domestic workers who are able or willing to do the work and that utilizing immigrant labor will not negatively impact the wages and working conditions of similarly employed domestic workers. The H2A program includes statutory and DOL regulatory worker protections and employer requirements regarding wages and working conditions. So who can apply for this program? Nope, I'm in the wrong slide. What is agricultural labor or services? Sorry. Agricultural labor for the H2A program is defined in federal regulations 20 CFR 655-103C. A lot of numbers there, but it includes this huge variety, a lot of different types of agricultural work. Some specific definitions that I think pertain to this group include agricultural labor or services, or agriculture work is defined as work done on a farm in the employment of any person in connection with the cultivation of the soil or in connection with raising or harvesting any agricultural, horticultural commodity, including raising, shearing, feeding, caring for, training, management of livestock, bees, poultry, and fur-bearing animals and wildlife. But as you see, the first part of that includes anything related to agriculture and horticultural commodities. Another part of the definition also says that agriculture is any work that's done in the employ of the operator of a farm in handling, planting, drying, packing, packaging, processing, freezing, grading, storing, or delivering to storage or to market or to carrier for transportation to market in its unmanufactured state, any agricultural or horticultural commodity, but only if such operator produces more than 1/2 of the commodity with which respect the service is performed. Excuse me. The US DOL will determine when you file your application what is agricultural labor when they review everything that you've provided. But generally, activities that a farmer would do on their farm are usually considered agricultural labor for the H2A program. Activities that are usually done by a contractor or specialty service like a veterinarian or a soil scientist, those are not typically occupations eligible for the H2A program. So work that a farmer would do on a farm generally meets the definition of occupations that you can apply for H2A workers for. So who can apply for the H2A program? There's different categories that you will ask when you are applying. Applications can include individual employers, which is just one employer, a non-association. There's joint employer, which is 2 or more employers who are not in an association. Each employer who is seeking to jointly employ the H2A workers under the application must be identified on the ETA 790 when applying. An association as a sole employer is when the agricultural association applies, and that association itself will be acting as the sole employer of the H2A workers. Association joint employer is when an agricultural association's employer members are going to jointly employ H2A workers. All employers must be named in the applications utilizing this type of application. DOL may ask follow-up questions regarding joint employment, so it may be helpful to work with an agent or an attorney to ensure that you're providing the Department of Labor with correct information. The H2A visa program has specific program requirements, and we'll get into those. But it also overlaps with other federal and state regulations that oversee the use of seasonal agricultural labor. There are federal requirements that are part of the workforce services that DWD provides. That's part of WIOA, which is the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, that requires DWD to provide employment services to migrant and seasonal farm workers. That's equitable to those that are non-migrant and seasonal farm workers. And so there are special requirements that DWD has to do. And these federal requirements include requirements to conduct outreach to all seasonal agricultural workers. We have to create a process for agricultural employers to utilize our job center employment services to find seasonal agricultural workers. It's called the Agricultural Recruitment System, or ARS. There's an established employment services complaint system, and and also part of these federal regulations require that the U.S. Department of Labor monitor the state's compliance with these federal requirements to provide services to migrant and seasonal farm workers. So as part of those requirements, part of the services that we're required to provide, we are required to conduct outreach to migrant and seasonal farm workers where they live, work, and gather. Part of those services, the outreach is designed to bring services provided at our job centers to MSFWs to ensure that they can access services even when they cannot visit a job center. When we conduct outreach, we have to explain, there's 4 pieces that we have to discuss as part of our outreach presentation. We have to explain services that are offered at all of our job centers. We have to share information and provide referrals to our community partners. We have to give an overview of worker rights, and we have to explain the employment services and employment-related law complaint system. The migrant seasonal farmer outreach specialist is also required to be observant of the living and working conditions. This is an observation. The outreach workers are not investigating. They're not investigators. They're not doing investigations. They're just being observant. Their main goal, though, is to connect MSFWs, migrant seasonal farm workers, to job centers, employment services, complaint system, referrals, and other MSFW groups and partners. Outreach is conducted to seasonal agriculture workers, all seasonal agricultural workers. So this includes migrant seasonal agricultural workers and local seasonal agricultural workers. H2A workers are seasonal agricultural workers. So we also conduct outreach to them.
Can I ask one?
The other program, oh, go ahead.
Just jump in and ask a quick question. Are all of these outreach elements that you're discussing there things that the DWD is doing and farmers don't need to do that because the DWD is doing it? Or is this each farmer that is applying for H2A workers needs to be doing these outreach items?
Good question. DWD does the outreach. We have staff who are MSFW outreach specialists, but employers who hire seasonal workers, we work with them, and they have to allow us to come and conduct outreach.
Gotcha.
If you have H2A workers, we'll get to in a second, but one of your terms and conditions as an H2A employer is to allow access to your workers. For our outreach workers, allow access to your H2A workers. So this is another separate program. It's not in the H2A program. DWD does outreach to all seasonal workers. DWD does the work, but agricultural employers, we work with them to allow us access to their workers. And for H2A employers, it's specifically written in their contract and terms and conditions that they have to allow us to come visit their workers.
Gotcha. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. The other separate program or area that H2A overlaps with is Wisconsin state migrant labor law. Wisconsin has a specific state migrant labor law that provides protections to migrant seasonal agricultural workers. The definition of a migrant worker under state law includes any person who travels to Wisconsin from outside of the state to work for not more than 10 months in seasonal agricultural employment. The definition of a migrant worker under state law includes most H2A workers. So most H2A workers are also covered by state migrant labor law, and employers also have to abide by state migrant labor law and the requirements of the federal H2A program. So DWD's Bureau of Job Service, that's us at DWD, we administer state migrant labor laws. I know we're familiar with some of you already through the use migrant workers, and we've come out and worked with you to inspect housing or conduct outreach. But DWD administers those laws. We have enforcement capabilities, but our goal always is compliance. We want to educate employers on what their responsibilities are, help you know what you need to do, and help you be in compliance to benefit yourself and your migrant workers. So there's some specific areas that our state migrant labor law covers are certification of migrant labor contractors. So any person who, for a fee or other consideration on behalf of another person or employer, recruits, solicits, hires, or furnishes migrant workers, is considered a migrant labor contractor, and they have to apply with DWD to receive a certification to conduct those duties in Wisconsin. State migrant labor law also requires that all migrant workers receive a written recruiting disclosure statement at the time they're recruited and a migrant labor work agreement that's provided to them at the time of hire. The certification of migrant labor camps is put in the hands of our team here at DWD, and then also maintaining those standards throughout the season. There are some requirements regarding the payment of wages to workers, field sanitation requirements. And then in terms of if we come out and we find violations, our first thing we want to do is help that employer understand their role, help them correct. But if they're for some reason employer does not correct the violations or the issue, the chapter does give us the ability to assess penalties. And then we also, as part of our regulations, require postings or noticing of worker rights. So employers of H2A workers must also ensure they're meeting the requirements of the state migrant labor law, as well as requirements of the H2A program. So there's overlap between those two programs. All right, so let's get into the meat here, the H2A visa process. So I'm going to go over the H2A visa application process. After I go through kind of the official process, I'll also have some kind of suggested steps for you to take to help ensure that you don't get caught up along the way. So who can file an application for an H2A visa worker? First, you must be an employer with a place of business physically located in the United States. You have to have an FEIN. You have to be able to pay, hire, fire, supervise, or otherwise control the work of the workers you employ. The work is performed most consistent of agricultural work or services, such as, so the work that's going to be performed as part of this application has to mostly consist of agricultural labor services, such as planting, raising, cultivating, harvesting, or production of any agricultural or horticultural commodity. And we've talked a little bit about that already. The work must be full-time, at least 35 hours or more per week. And the work must be seasonal or temporary in nature and tied to a certain time of the year by a reoccurring event or pattern, such as an annual growing cycle, normally lasting 10 months or less. The job order, or the ETA 790 that you'll fill out, which we'll talk about in a second, must be filed 75 to 60 calendar days before the employer's first date of need. The first date of need is what you put on the ETA 790 as the first date under the period of intended employment. We'll look at that in just a second here too.
And I did put a link to that that Department of Labor document if people want to follow along at home.
Okay. The overview of the whole H2A process starts with filing a job order, or we'll call this an ETA 790. So those words are usually synonymously, job order or ETA 790. This step and step 4 that's up to step 4 on the screen are completed using the Department of Labor's FLAG system. It's an online system for employers and their agents or attorneys to file H2A petitions and paperwork. FLAG stands for Foreign Labor Application Gateway. We love our acronyms in federal government, state and federal government. So FLAG is an acronym, but everything is filed online. Once that ETA 790 is submitted, DWD reviews that. If it's in compliance, DWD marks the ETA 790 as approved. And DOL reviews and will issue a notice of acceptance. If they find everything to be in compliance, the employer or their agent then files the ETA 9142A, which is the actual application for temporary employment certification. DWD does not see this application. We are not a part of the 9142A as part of our review process. This goes directly to DOL via the flag system. The next step is that you have to recruit U.S. workers. This includes reaching out to domestic workers who you've hired in the past year. You have to reach back out to them. And you also have to have other recruitment efforts. You prepare recruitment reports for the Department of Labor that demonstrate the efforts you've taken to recruit local workers. And then step 4, after your ETA 790 is approved, the ETA 9142A is approved, you have housing locations, which we'll get more into what that'll entails a little bit later, but you have housing locations inspected and approved, and your recruitment report is submitted and is in compliance. The Department of Labor will issue a certificate of temporary labor. This certificate is then automatically filed from the flag system to USCIS, which is the United States Customs and Immigration Service, where you actually will get the visa. So that certificate of temporary labor is what is basically your application is certified, and then that certification gets automatically sent to USCIS. So next, you or your agent needs to file an I-129 to USCIS. Again, DWD is not a part of this process, so I can't speak very specifically to how this part works. On USCIS's website, there's an address list where the form needs to be mailed. A lot of employers work with agents or attorneys who are familiar with the H2A process, or that's their job is labor certifications and visa work. So they often are who files these reports. So DWD really can't assist with filling out those forms, but in terms of what happens, this is the next step is now your application moves to USCIS. Once USCIS approves the form I-129, you can start recruiting workers from outside the US. The workers must apply for an H2A visa with the US Department of State at a US embassy or consulate abroad, and then seek admission to the United States with US Customs and Border Protection at a US point of entry. Okay, I have a lot of slides left and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to talk fast. Okay. The next step in the H2A application process, the first step, so let's go through these steps in a little bit more detail. The first step in the process is to file an ETA 790. I'm going to go through this process and review the form because it's going to help explain a little bit about everything you need to do as an H2A employer as part of this form. So most H2A employers work with, like I said, an agent or an attorney to help file paperwork. The agent or attorney, though, is going to maybe asking you to fill out the ETA 790 or at least get your input on this form because it really lays out the job requirements as well as the terms and conditions of the job. So you want to make sure, even if they're filling it out, that you're on the same page with your agent or attorney regarding what's on this form, because it is your responsibility as an employer to ensure that you're meeting all of the things that you've put on this ETA 790. So you want to make sure you're on the same page about what's written on this ETA 790. The State Workforce Agency, which is DWD, we review this ETA 790 for completeness. We ensure it meets federal requirements, and it also has to meet any state-specific requirements and employment-related law as well. I'm not going to go through every single section, but here are some things we're going to point out. The ETA 790 is a contract. So you cannot require workers to do work or basically anything that is not listed on the ETA 790. So it's important that you're filling this information out accurately and including everything that you want and those workers to be able to do. So for example, in this screenshot here, this is the job offer information section. You cannot require that H2A workers work more hours than you state on this form. You can request that they work more. You can say, I've got extra hours this week. And a lot of H2A workers are like, yes, I'm here to make as much money as possible. But you cannot require that they work more, and you cannot retaliate or punish workers if they do not work more than the hours that's requested on this section. That job duties section here, it's the last thing that's kind of at the bottom. It's going to be it's going to open up like a text box where you're going to fill out all the job duties for this position. This is very important because based on the duties you want this person to perform, EWD and DOL assign an occupation code. And the occupation code is important for a couple of reasons. First, it determines the wage rate you are required to pay the workers. And also, if you have non-H2A workers doing the same job, those workers need to be paid the same rate as the H2A workers. So if you're putting a position description in here for a job that you currently have non-H2A workers doing, you have to pay those non-H2A workers the same amount that you're putting that the workers that the H2A workers are going to do. So you're making sure that this information is accurate. And you also want to file separate H2A applications for different occupations. So Allison had mentioned that there's some different types of job duties for cranberry occupations, including like a job that kind of sounds similar to general farm work versus another type maybe that requires experience driving equipment, such as like an agricultural equipment operator. Or if someone's driving maybe semi-trucks and they might be considered a heavy tractor trailer truck driver. You would fill out separate applications for each of those occupations that you're looking to bring in H2A workers for. So one for farm worker, a separate application for agricultural equipment operator, and a separate one for your heavy tractor trailer truck drivers. The next section of the ETA 790 will ask for the wage rate. You can provide piece rate. However, you still have to provide a minimum hourly rate, because if the worker doesn't make enough in the piece rate that meets the same as the minimum hourly rate, the employer has to make up the difference between those two. So there are 6 specific occupations that the Department of Labor has identified as regular farm work occupations that we regularly see. They're listed on the screen here. Those workers, you have to pay the adverse effect wage rate, or the AWER. And that rate is set by the Department of Labor. This year, that rate is $18.15. So we review what you put in that job duty section, and we determine based on the job duties which one of these codes they fit into, or if they don't fit into one of these occupational codes, then we assign them a different occupation code. So if the work doesn't fit within these 6 things, then the U.S. Department of Labor requires that the employer pay them the mean hourly wage rate that's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Occupational Employment and Statistics data. That's a lot, but there's federal BLS wage data that they gather. And let's say, for example, you do have a heavy tractor trailer truck driver. That person is going to make more than an agricultural equipment operator. Their occupations are different. There's more certification and skill needed. Maybe there's a CDL required to be a heavy tractor trailer truck driver. So that individual is going to have to be paid a higher wage rate, and we use this BLS data to gather that rate. And it's somewhere, I think it's about $25 an hour right now, I think, for that occupation. So that's why it's important to clearly state what your work duties are going to be, because based on that, we will assign an occupation, and based on that, that's how much you have to pay your workers. So the AWER is set basically because the Department of Labor has a statutory requirement to ensure that we're not ensure that there aren't adverse effects on wages or working conditions on domestic workers from the hiring of foreign workers. So AWERs are the minimally hour wage that must be paid and offered to the H2A workers and workers who are domestic workers who are doing corresponding employment. So if you have current workers or you hire a domestic worker to do the same work duties as that H2A worker, you have to pay them the same rate. The minimum job qualification section here, we use this. We at DWD, our role is to help you recruit domestic workers. That's why we're involved in this process in general. we're putting this job order into our Job Center of Wisconsin system, and we and workers are applying to DWD, and we're taking a look at what you've put in this minimum qualifications section. And if that worker meets the basic minimum qualifications, you have to hire them. So if they apply to this job, they come to DWD and said, Cranberry, I want to work at this Cranberry Farm A, then if they meet the minimum qualifications that are in this section, we will send that referral to you. And that if that person does meet those minimum qualifications, you do have to hire them. So there's going to ask you for a place of all of employment on the ETA 790. Make sure you include all of the employment locations where the H2A workers may be working. Fields can be listed as intersections, the latitude and longitude coordinates. You may not have an H2A worker work at an employment site that is not listed on the ETA 790. So make sure it's comprehensive. The H2A employers have to provide housing to H2A workers at no cost. No cost includes anything associated with the housing, including bedding, utilities, kitchen utensils, garbage pickup, septic tank maintenance. That all has to be provided at no cost. Similar to the employment locations, you cannot move H2A workers to a different housing locations that's not listed on the ETA 790. So if you need to move workers, you need to list every location where they may be working. And then the housing has to be inspected by the department, by DWD. We also inspect that housing, and it has to meet federal requirements of the H2A program, but also the state requirements of the state migrant labor law. You can use motels and hotels. DWD does not inspect those. We do not inspect those locations because they're licensed by DADCAP. However, you still need to meet there's some standard OSHA housing requirements, including sleeping square footage. You have to provide storage for clothing, the spacing of beds. You can't have two guys sharing a twin bed or a queen bed. And the kitchen has to be a full kitchen in order for you to not provide meals. There is a fact sheet, DOL's fact sheet 26G provides those specific requirements if you're going to house workers in a hotel or motel. So employers also have to provide workers 3 meals a day or a fully furnished kitchen and access to a store to purchase groceries at least once a week. So like I mentioned in my last slide, if workers are staying in a hotel or motel, the kitchen has to be a full kitchen. Otherwise, the employer has to provide 3 meals a day. The employer can charge workers for those meals, but that charging rate is set by the Department of Labor. Currently, it's $15.88 a day. Transportation has to be provided at no cost from the living quarters to the work site. So you have to transport those workers daily. Employers are also responsible for paying workers for inbound and outbound transportation and reasonable cost incurred by the workers for transportation and daily subsidies. The cost has to be paid from the place from which the worker came to work for the employer to the employer's place of employment. So if that worker was recruited and know they're going to come work for you when they leave their home, you have to pay transportation from their home to the place of employment. Or if they did not know they were going to work for you until they got to the consulate, then you're paying from the consulate to the place of employment. For inbound transportation, the worker can pay the cost up front, and then the employer has until 50% of the way through the contract to reimburse the workers. The transportation used is the most reasonable and economical. And then for outbound transportation, the transportation costs have to be paid or reimbursed to the workers before they leave. The referrals piece. I mentioned this before, but it's very important to note you have to continue to accept applications and take referrals for domestic workers who apply for the same position your H2A workers are filling 50% of the way through the contract. So even if you have 5 H2A workers here, if a domestic worker applies for, let's say you have 5 H2A workers who are agricultural equipment operators. If a domestic worker applies for that agricultural equipment operator position and they are qualified, you have to hire that worker. Even if it means that you're displacing an H2A worker and have to send them back home, you have to hire that domestic worker.
I
You
do
have
want to
50% of the way through the contract to do that. Okay,
I want to jump.
Allison, sorry.
Yeah, no, we only have about 5 minutes left in our scheduled hour, and I think the way I want to handle this is, I think I personally am good to stay till 1:30, but I want to give our growers a chance to ask questions since Katie and Elena here have kind of the answers to everything, and we've kind of gone in, deep on the first half. We haven't really touched the second half so much yet, but ask questions about anything after we've had our Q&A session, then we can continue the kind of deeper dive till about 1:30. So I know if there are people that have a hard stop at 1, ask your questions now, and then we'll keep going with the slide. Is that good for you, Katie and Elena?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yes.
So ways to ask questions, as always, unmute yourself and ask a question, or ask a question directly into the chat. Or if you want to ask a question anonymously, either send me a text or use the drop down that says ask just Allison. I think while I wait for other people to ask questions, but please always cut me off. I'm here filling time until someone else asks a question. So you gave us, I think, the name of the fact sheet for what a hotel room accommodations need to be. Is there a fact sheet for what housing, if the house is on farm, needs to be? I know I've had issues with growers thinking like, well, this house is good for me to live in, so it's probably good for a migrant worker as well. And then hearing like, oh, there's no microwave, and like, oh, I didn't know that you needed a microwave to have a full kitchen. So a list of what counts as a full kitchen would be awesome if you could provide that.
Yeah, and I'll provide, I'm going to gather some resources this afternoon, Allison, and send your way regarding our checklists that we use at DWD when we inspect the housing. I'll have a link to that previous slide where I talked a little bit about DOL's rule regarding firing someone for cause. The fact sheet, I'll put a link in there to that as well.
Oh, great.
And then, so I'll add some links and some attachments and send it your way if you want to share with the group after this presentation.
That sounds awesome.
I did add the USDOL wage and hour fact sheets for H2A, and it lists quite a few of their fact sheets, and it's in the chat. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I will copy all these out of the chat and send them to the attendees from today. Growers, please ask questions, but if
I have one.
Great.
Recently, was the Philippines opened up as a country that we can recruit from? I know in the past it was not.
So that is not, they do keep a list on USCIS's website about which countries are approved to bring in H2A workers from. I don't usually keep up to date on that since that's not really part of we don't usually find out where employers recruit workers from until we do that outreach visit. So that's something that usually works between your employer, and then if you work with an agent or an attorney, they're the ones who have either recruiters in those countries, or they're the ones who know how to get those visas from, like, work with consulates in those countries. So we at DWD won't really be able to, speak to how well that's, if it's on the website, then yes, it's open for people to be able to utilize H2A workers from there. But how that process is working within that country and recruiting workers from there is not something DWD would be able to speak on.
Thank you very much.
So Elena just put in that DHS website that lists what countries are eligible and not. So I know a lot of growers here are, and we have the Philippines, and it has an asterisk after it. Eligible to participate in H2B, but not eligible to participate in H2A. Maybe if you guys want to give a quick, what's the H2A versus H2B difference in one sentence, that might be valuable.
Yes. H2A is, so they're both temporary seasonal. H2A is temporary seasonal agriculture. And then H2B is temporary seasonal non-agriculture. So they're basically very similar in that it's for temporary seasonal labor, but H2A is for agricultural work, and then B is for non-agricultural work. So we see a lot of that in landscaping, carnival workers, hospitality in like the dells, lifeguards in the dells. So things that are seasonal landscaping. We've seen some construction now start to, because construction is seasonal in Wisconsin, right? We only work during the summer. So there are some big difference. So that's the big difference, but there are some larger differences too, though, in terms of there's a cap on H2A visas. There's no cap on H2As. So they only have a certain number of H2B visas that will be issued. And H2A does not have a cap either. So those are just some kind of basic differences. But H2A, A is for agriculture.
Okay.
H2B, everything else
And
for
so-
seasonal temporary.
As far as a cranberry grower is concerned, H2A can include marsh labor and or truck driving, but possibly if you specifically said, I have family or someone in the Philippines that can help me find workers, I would have to only bring in maybe trucking. I couldn't do the farm workers from the Philippines if it's only H2B. Is that a correct guess? I'm totally guessing, so tell me I'm wrong.
I would say probably not, because the nature of cranberry work is in agriculture. So the likelihood of getting an H2B visa for work that is where the work is agriculture is probably not likely. So
Gotcha.
truck driving, because still meets the definition of agriculture. If you're truck driving, you're bringing that raw product, that cranberry product, from the marsh to wherever it's going, storage or to a processing facility. That transportation of the raw product meets the definition of agriculture. So it would still have to be H2A. So you would not be able to likely use H2B for truck driving, because the truck driving is agriculture in nature.
Okay. One other question I will ask, and again, please, growers, cut me off and ask other questions, but while we've still got the bulk of the people online, if a grower wants to hire some H2A workers, it sounds to me like the place that they kick off that process is by filling out that ETA Form 790, and they need to do that at least 75 calendar days before they expect to have anyone on site. Is there any other first step, or is there any other mandatory step, or is there anything else that needs to happen before that 75 days before they arrive, just so that growers know where to start?
Yeah, I would say the first thing you need to do is make sure you have a place to check your housing before you get started, before you fill out that form. And I have a slide to this, kind of a combined timeline of everything is towards the end here. But the first thing you need to figure out is before you even fill out that form, what your timelines look like. You have to have a house. Under state law, that house has to have a fire inspection. You have to have water test results. So you want to make sure before you even file that paperwork that you know that you're going to be ready to go with where the workers are going to go when they get here. The other thing is, your first step, though, realistically, is to find an agent or an attorney. I don't know any H2A employers who file themselves without the support of one of those things. And maybe I'm not saying you have to, but I don't know. Elena, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know any of them that don't utilize a labor agency or an immigration attorney to help them with this process. So I think that you may want to start with talking to other employers in Wisconsin who utilize the H2A program and ask those questions about who they utilize for those services. I think that word of mouth through I know there's some cranberry growers who already utilize H2A, having that conversation to see about who they use. There's on DOL's website, they have a list of performance data. If you Google DOL H2A performance data, and you can download all of a list of everyone who's, last year's list of who's requested H2A visas. And in that list, they include, it also includes the agent that assists them. So you can get a full, you can peruse that, who's all using H2A in Wisconsin or the US, what agencies they're using. So there's some big, I would say, you likely want to first talk to an employer who is also utilizing H2A. I would suggest that. And then likely connecting with an agent or an employer, and then identifying how you're going to house these workers, and making sure that you're reviewing they're very tight regulations. You are bringing in guest workers from another country, and the Department of Labor and DWD has very, high standards for what that housing is going to look like when you're bringing in workers to work seasonally and they don't, they're not from this area. They're migrant workers. This is not where they live. And so there are some strict standards about what that housing looks like. So making sure that that's what is in order, and making it before you even start the H2A application process. I would like the ETA 790, filling that out. Those are kind of the steps that I would first engage in before you even create a login to the flag system.
Okay. I've got a question in the chat. Am I able to apply for my camp certificate before I send in my ETA 790, and I need to get clarification on this because I don't know it, but I think that means this is a person who's been using H2As in the past and they need to get the thumbs up, this is okay housing. Who can they reach out to get that housing approved before they've gone through the work of the ETA 790?
Yes, and we also have a slide on this at the end, but this is a great question.
Okay,
So there's the flag system is where you put your request for the federal for the H2A program. But then you also have to, for housing, you have to meet state standards as well. And the state has a process where you have to file an application for each housing location, which in Wisconsin we call them migrant labor camps. And so, yes, you should. There are two separate processes: filing in the flag system and then doing your state your request for your housing to be inspected and approved by the state. Yes, you can file, and we really encourage you to file your state application for your camp or your housing before you even file your ETA 790. We suggest at least 3 months before your date of need to file your state camp application. And then that gives us time to get in our queue and get scheduled with our inspectors even before your H2A application is in. Because that application is filed 75 to 60 days before your date of need. And the Department of Labor deadline date for us to approve your housing is 30 days. But if you can imagine, there's 200 camps that all want to be used between March and April, and we've got 2 people. So the earlier you can get to go out and inspect those. So the earlier you can get your camp application in, the more we can get you in the queue and scheduled for an inspection. So that's not holding. So that doesn't, because that's one of the things that can hold up as we go through timelines here, can hold up an application being certified, is we're cutting it close for us to get out to do an inspection. And then there's things that we find that aren't correct and you have to correct them. And now we're waiting for those corrections to happen. And we can't tell DOL your housing is approved because we're still waiting for stuff to get done. So a long-winded way of answering that question to say, yes, you can file your state application for your housing before you file your federal forms, your ETA 790s and flag.
Awesome. And so the follow-up question on that is, how early can you file? Elena answered in the chat, at least 3 months, but I recommend 4 to 5 months, especially if this is your first time. And maybe Elena, if you want to give a link to, or if Katie, if you know the offhand, the form to file or the website to go to put in that submission, that request submission. I also had a question of, can an H2A become a permanent hire? And that one might be a longer question. So feel free to say there's a complicated answer or there's an easy answer. Either way, yeah.
Well, from my understanding, there is no path to citizenship, right? There's no path to permanent residency from H2A to permanent resident. So that's my understanding at this point in the way the immigration process works, is that there is not a path to go from an H2A to a permanent to a citizen or to permanent residence.
Is there any cap on, you can only come back for 15 years in a row, or you can only come back for 20 years in a row? So if someone really likes the arrangement of your working at your marsh, they can come back each year ad infinitum.
Correct. Again and again and again. Yep. So some people who've started this, the pioneers in the H2A program who have been using this for several years, a lot of them have the same workers that come back again and again and again every year. So there is no cap on how many times they can receive that visa to come work at your location or another location. But there is not a cap on the per worker visas that they hand out.
And Elena added the water lab report and fire inspection don't have to be attached at the time you file for your housing application, so you can get those in, you know, send your data into, or your samples into the lab at the same time as you're applying. And the migrant labor camp forms are DWD/job service /MSFW for migrant something farm workers /forms, and migrant labor camp forms is the word there. I got another anonymous question. How do we navigate when the fire department says they work for DHS and not DWD and they don't have a protocol for this? Or I guess, how do we navigate when the departments have different answers?
Sure. So, one of the things that DWD and their state migrant labor law changed in February of 2024 is it is a requirement of all migrant labor camps to get a fire inspection done by the local fire inspector, and then provide to DWD that housing unit that you're using as a migrant labor camp meets the fire local and state fire safety codes. So one of the things that has to happen is that also as part of your getting housing, oftentimes people are using what were previously a private residence. So it might be a farmhouse on your farm, and it was used to be, you know, where grandma lived for years, and now you're going to turn it into a migrant labor camp. So one of the things that the fire inspector needs is for that facility, that house, to be properly classified so they can do the correct inspection. That is on you as the owner of that property to go through the plan review process in your local area, to go through this, what they call a change of use. This is no longer a private residence. So that a lot of times what you're going to hear from a fire inspector is to say, we don't inspect private residences. And so then you're like, well, what do I do? Well, what you need to do is you need to go through the plan review process, and you need to change that house from being classified as a private residence to say to your local, you know, change review board or whoever, DSPS change review process, to say, well, I'm doing a change of use. This is going from a private residence to a migrant labor camp, which is a house for transitory adults who are unrelated. So there are classifications in the commercial building code that would change the classification of this house from a private residence into what it should be properly classified. And there's specific classifications that they're kind of like they're called like R1, R2, R3, which is kind of like they're resident facilities, but they have a kind of a commercial side. So once it's properly classified, the fire inspector can go in and do the inspection. So ultimately, like that's what part of what you need to do as you're preparing for your housing is you're not going to use this as a private residence anymore. And so the change of use, we ask that the camp operators go through that change of use process to ensure that the house is properly classified so that the fire inspector can actually do the fire inspection. So that's kind of what we run into. And then ultimately what we can do as well is while you're working through that process, or if you're using an apartment building and you're running into any concerns, apartment buildings are usually inspected once a year anyway, as part of being an apartment complex, or any other different type of facility. If you're running into issues, there is a variance process that you can utilize to request from the Department of Workforce Development, from us at DWD, that you receive a variance from a specific requirement. So you would reach out and say, I'm having problems getting the fire inspector to inspect my house. I need some more time to figure this out. And we can say, okay, we'll issue a variance so we can continue and certify your camp, even though you're missing this provision of the code. So there is a way to kind of work around and give you time to get that figured out. But ultimately, that's what needs to be. You need to go through that change of use process for your facility to be properly classified so the inspector can do an inspection.
Another question, does reclassifying it change the zoning from private residence to, and so I assume the answer might be county by county, ask early, but
I agree. I'm not that part. I'm not an expert on. I'm reaching out to, but it's the classification is like R1, R2, so kind of the same as like a group home for like young adults, and those usually are in neighborhoods. So the idea is that it is a residence, but it's not used for a family. So I'm not going to tell you for sure yes or no. But I think that is something we're looking into. But I will say I have not seen that yet. How about that? I'll put it that way.
Okay.
And then we can get some more feedback. If you want to reach out to me directly with that question too, I can let you know. Or once I find out from DSPS in a few weeks, I can also let Allison know if she wants to share it with everyone as well.
That might sound good. And I guess also, I didn't even really check you guys' calendars too. I think I want to let you guys dive back into your presentation proper, but if people still have questions, do keep asking them. I will have to leave at 1:30 because I've got a doctor's appointment at 2, but I can let the meeting keep running if there are people that want to keep asking questions and keep learning. So just as setting expectations for everything. So I know there's a lot of good questions here. A lot of interest. We're very grateful for you guys being willing to share all of your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's keep going. All right, so we talked about domestic workers and hiring them if they're qualified. All right. So here are some state-specific laws that you just want to be aware of when you're filing your ETA 790. That's going to help us be able to review and approve those more quickly. So in Wisconsin, there's specific requirements regarding deductions where you can, for deductions that are made for deductions for damages, including damages to like equipment or tools or housing, a worker cannot pre-authorize those deductions. So this is kind of semantics when you're making this statement. So if you are going to include a statement about charging a worker for any damages that they have done to tools or damages to the housing, you have to include they have to make sure you're saying that the deduction may be made, MAY, because they can't be pre-approved that you're going to make this deduction, because in order to make the deduction, you can only do it after the damage has been done and that the worker has authorized you to take that deduction out in writing. So when you're making statements about deductions, just keep in mind that in Wisconsin, you cannot say the employer will deduct for damages. That's not going to meet the state requirement. So you want to make something similar to what's here, that you may deduct for damages, and you can, but only after the damage is done and the worker has authorized that deduction in writing. You can always charge back, like you could send them an invoice and tell them they need to, this is specific to deductions, though. You can't deduct it from their paycheck unless they have authorized that deduction in writing. And then a couple ETA 790s this year included some language that stated that it required workers to vacate housing upon termination. In Wisconsin state migrant labor law, it requires that the employer must first pay the worker any owed wages before requiring them to vacate. So you just want to make sure you're not saying that once they're terminated, they have to leave. You want to make sure that to be in compliance that you would say that upon termination, workers will be paid final wages and then must vacate the housing. So just to be clear, to make sure you're in compliance with the state migrant labor law. I did include here that access to housing, you cannot require authorization like that, that visitors have to be authorized. Wisconsin has a state migrant labor law that is basically free access, like the workers get to determine who can visit them. The employer cannot prevent someone from visiting. And then the federal government made that change as well last year. So kind of some timelines. The ETA 790 is a quick turnaround. DWD has 7 calendar days to review it. When we review it, we will either approve it and we put a job order in DWD's online labor exchange system, Job Center of Wisconsin, and then employers can, job seekers can apply to DWD for that job, and it stays open until 50% of the contract period has passed. And if the ETA 790 is not in compliance, DWD, Elena, or myself, we will send an email that's called a notice of deficiency, and we list what's deficient. This is what you're missing. This is what is deficient. And then the employer has 5 days to respond with a correction. And then DWD has 3 days to approve or deny and say, okay, yep, that correction can be made. And if after the notice of deficiency you correct, then we can switch it to approved and you move along that process. Usually our goal is always to work with you for compliance. We want to help you make sure you know what you're doing and help you get that job order in the correct shape so we can go ahead and approve it. All right, filing a 9142. Once DWD is approved the ETA 790, DOL reviews it, and then if it meets their requirements as well, they issue a notice of acceptance, the official letter notice of acceptance. Once you receive that notice, you can file the ETA 9142A. DWD does not review this form, so I don't have very much insight about it. However, it does require that you provide attachments and appendix to support your request for workers, your copy of workers' compensation insurance, if you're a migrant labor contractor, your license, contracts between you and other employers have to be included in this. You have to demonstrate that the job is seasonal or temporary in nature. And then you're signing this form to say that you have read and understand the terms and conditions of the program as well. Again, this is all filed online in the flag system. So what are those terms and conditions that you're going to be signing on that 9142A? So the terms and conditions, some of them we kind of talked about as I went through the ETA 790, and the ETA 790 itself, because it's a contract, if you print it out, it includes a terms and conditions section because that's what you give to the worker so that they can see all the terms and conditions of employment as well. So it goes through each of these items that I've listed here and kind of details what the employer must provide, and it gives us the references to the regulations. So you can also utilize that if you want to look that up yourself. You have to provide workers' compensation. Not all agricultural employment requires workers' compensation regularly, but if you are bringing in H2A workers, you do have to provide workers' compensation. And I think DOL is going to require you to provide proof of that on the 9142A. We didn't go into detail about this yet, but there is a 3/4 guarantee. So as an H2A employer, you are guaranteeing to that worker that they are going to work at least 3/4 of the hours that's in that contract period. So if they don't work for that, let's say you have a short contract and you're going to the total number of hours for that contract is 100. You're guaranteeing that over that time frame, you are going to pay them 75. You're going to pay them 75 hours worth of work. If you don't meet that 3/4 guarantee throughout the season, you have to pay the difference. You have to meet up to 3/4 of the hours. So overtime work. So sometimes what will happen for H2A employers is 1 week they'll have less work, but then the next week they'll have more. And you can offer workers to work more hours a day, and they can take those overtime hours and they get counted towards that minimum guarantee. However, the worker does not have to accept those extra hours. Like I mentioned earlier, the workers are not required to work more hours than are listed in the ETA 790. So you can't say, well, I offered you 100 hours this week and you didn't take them. Well, if the ETA 790 only says that it's anticipated they're going to work 40 hours a week, then that only 40 hours, that a worker only has to accept up to 40 hours a week of work. So so you do have to know that there is a minimum guarantee, basically saying if you're going to bring this worker in from another country, they're guaranteed to be at least paid 75% of that contract. We already talked a bit about no-cost housing, meals, and what you have to provide for that, transportation. You also have to provide all the tools and equipment to do the job to the workers at no cost. We discussed rates of pay, but you also have to provide a written wage statement with hours, earnings, and deductions. So you have to provide them. It can be email, but if a worker does ask for it to be in writing, printed, you do have to provide a printed physical copy for them if they do request it. The terms and conditions also describe what you as an employer must do if a worker abandons the job or is terminated for cause. We already talked about that DOL recently updated the regulations regarding terminating for cause. So you want to make sure you review that guidance. And you do have to notify DOL if a worker is abandoning or is terminated for cause. Contract impossibility provides information on your obligations if an event occurs. They oftentimes call it an act of God that prevents you from fulfilling the full terms of the contract. You are still responsible for the minimum guarantee and for both inbound and outbound transportation and substance, even in that case. All deductions must be disclosed on the ETA 790. If you do not list a deduction on the ETA 790, you cannot make that deduction. So make sure you include even the optional deductions, like you may have an option for healthcare, or maybe you provide an option for cell phone plans. Make sure you include all of that on the ETA 790 because you can't make a deduction if it's not listed on there. You have to provide the H2A worker a copy of their ETA 790 no later than the time at which the worker applies for the visa and at the time of hire. If you're hiring a domestic worker. And there are some, if you hired a domestic worker, so if you were referred, if you were referred a domestic worker from that job order that DWD places in jobcenterwisconsin.com, and the start date of the contract changes, gets pushed back for whatever reason, you have to notify the order holding office, DOL, in writing at least 10 business days before that original first date of need. And you have to also notify DWD, and you have to report to DWD all the ways you tried to notify that domestic worker of the change of the start date. If you fail to give that notification in at least 10 days before the original first date of need, then you have to still pay that domestic worker from that first date of need for the first week with the originally anticipated first week of need, or you have to provide alternative work if such alternative work is stated in the clearance order, so in the job order. Basically, if you, what they're saying is if you're going to switch that start date and push it back for whatever reason, you still have to pay domestic workers that you've hired, U.S. citizens that you've hired through Job Center of Wisconsin. So not happening very often, but it is in your terms and conditions. If you have to basically, the employment agrees that there's no extension of employment beyond the period of employment specified in the job order will release you from paying wages earned. You assure that you're going to meet all working conditions of state and federal law, and you agree that you're going to email DWD or the offer holding office by email or telephone if a crop is maturing earlier or later, or basically anything is going to affect the terms and conditions of that employment and that contract. If you are a farm labor contractor or migrant labor contractor, you have to be identified and have to have a federal identification card. And you're also assuring that you will give access to those outreach workers, which we talked about way in the beginning, that they have access to your H2A workers to conduct outreach activities. Okay. Now we're into housing, but we're at 1:30.
Katie, no, I think that everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Has been a great information. I really appreciate Katie and Elena for sharing all this. I was collecting all the links, so maybe I'm gonna put a document in there that we can share it through email because it's a lot of very valuable information. So actually, I was thinking this could be maybe H2A visa part 1 because this is a lot of things to cover. So I was wondering if we can put another thing or just to continue this because I think it's a lot of great information. I don't know what do you think?
That was I was thinking how glad I was that we originally were going to put this into 15 minutes in a normal brown bag with 2 other topics. And oh my gosh, am I glad we did our own hour.
Yeah.
But I'm open either way. I'm depending on you guys' schedule. I've made Hernando the co-host. I'm going to have to step away to head into the doctor's office. If you want to continue the meeting, we still have 14 participants total right now. So if you want to continue the meeting, and I'll let it keep recording, if you'd like to follow up after, if you'd like to set and follow up after, that's also fine by me. But I will, I'm gonna let you guys make that determination. If your calendars are free, I'd say continue to, you've got the people here, you can keep chatting with them. But I will need to step away, and I'm extremely, extremely grateful for all of your time, all of your knowledge. I got a bunch of anonymous questions, obviously, that I asked, but I also got a bunch of anonymous. I've been trying so hard to find this information. I'm so glad that you guys are sharing it. So everyone's really appreciative of having this information being brought together. So very, very grateful for that.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think I just moved my 1:30, so I can just keep going since you're going to record and share anyway.
Perfect.
If that's okay with the people on the meeting, if you still want to hang out for a little bit, we can keep going forward if that is what the majority of people want.
I don't know if everybody can just do the little, like in the chat, maybe a thumbs up or something, and maybe we know
Yeah,
that you
thumbs up.
I appreciate you guys. I'm sorry to be leaving myself, but I'm Hernando,
Yeah.
you can wait till everything's over and then push the end button.
No, that's great. Thank you very much,
Awesome.
Alison, for
Yeah.
bringing everybody together here and the opportunity to share this great information with Katie. So
Fantastic.
thank you very much.
Yeah. So thanks everyone. Keep going, keep having fun.
Okay.
Huge appreciation to all three of you and to all the growers who let me know this was a priority too.
All right. Well, sorry.
Good.
Okay.
Katie, all
Thanks.
yours again.
Okay.
Thank you
All
very much.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll try to also be quick because I know we're going long. But before your H2A application is approved, you'll need to have all of your housing. So before we get to that point where you're going to get that temporary notice of certification, before it's certified, you will have to have all the housing locations you plan to use for H2A workers inspected by DWD. So since H2A workers are migrant workers, the locations need to meet both state and federal requirements. So the annual migrant labor camp certification includes an annual inspection of the camp. Facilities are inspected using the state requirements, which are in Wisconsin Admin Code DWD 301.07, and the applicable federal housing requirement. So federal housing requirements used to inspect housing are OSHA requirements. That's in 29 CFR 1910.412. However, if your housing was built before April 3rd, 1980, you may ask DWD to use the old regulations of DOL ETA regulations of 20 CFR 654 Part E. Either way, you have to meet the state requirements and you have to meet federal requirements. DWD inspects using the OSHA requirements unless you request us to use the ETA requirements if your housing was built before 1980. So in Wisconsin, we kind of use housing and labor camps synonymously. So Wisconsin migrant labor law calls them migrant labor camps, and all migrant labor camps have to be certified to operate. The camp operator has to follow certain steps to ensure their facilities meet the requirements. When we say migrant labor camp, it can mean a number of different types of facilities. Employers use apartments or maybe a condo. There's 1 or 2 story homes, ranch homes, there's dormitories, etc. Any type of housing unit is considered a migrant labor camp in Wisconsin. So oftentimes I think people think of camps as like this huge group of housing units. But a lot of times right now, migrant labor camp really just means a house or an apartment in this apartment complex. If it's used to house seasonal agricultural migrant workers, it's considered a migrant labor camp. A separate application is required for each migrant labor camp. So by that we mean basically the way the state requirements are, if it has a separate address, it's considered a separate migrant labor camp. So if you're going to house workers at 2 different locations, you need to file 2 different applications, one for each location you're going to house those workers. So there's an online application. Elaine had put that in the chat. It's the 4849E. You need to fill that that form out online. As I said, it's one per camp. And there's going to be additional, when you're filling out this online form, it's going to ask you to submit your water test result or and your fire inspection report. You can't, there is an option though to say that you want to provide that information later, and you can provide that to DWD after you filed your initial application. The fire inspection report is documentation from a local fire department that your facility meets the state and local requirements, federal requirements and fire safety code, and for the number of occupants you plan to have at that camp. So we ask that you utilize, DWD has a template for the fire inspector to fill out that meets those requirements, because the one thing we often see are missing is a number of occupants. The fire inspector, their inspection report doesn't include that. So if you use DWD's template that's on our forms page, that'll have you fill out the top part, the inspector fills out the bottom, and it meets the requirements that DWD is looking for. That fire inspection can occur anytime 6 months before the application date. So you can get that fire inspection done and inspected 2 months before, 6 months before you file that application. So that can be done ahead of time. And your water test results, though, if you're using well water, has to be tested no more than 3 months before your date of occupancy. So there's differences here. 3 months before you plan to occupy the camp, that's when the water test results have to be taken. So that's a shorter time frame before you can take those water test results, which I think I go into a little bit here. You also have to develop an isolation plan. This is new in February of 2024, and the isolation plan is embedded in the online application. It's going to ask you how camp occupants will be informed of. So basically, you have to be prepared in case there's some sort of public health emergency, that if you need to isolate workers for whatever reason, that you're prepared to do that. So we just want to make sure. We learned that during COVID, we weren't not ready for isolating workers. So we just want to make sure that everyone has a plan in place, that what they're going to do and where they're going to house workers in case there is an emergency situation. So in their application, we're going to ask you, how are you going to inform the camp occupants that they need to isolate? Be specific. You can say that farm manager Tom Jones is going to talk to camp occupants regarding isolation needs if they need to isolate. Then we're going to ask you, how are the other camp occupants informed of the situation and safety procedures? So if someone has a condition that requires them to isolate, how are you going to tell that person that? And then how are you going to tell everybody else who lives with that person what's going on, and so that they know what they need to do to be safe from that person who's isolating? And then what's your internal processes to make sure that everyone in your business knows who needs to isolate, and if there is a need to isolate due to a public emergency, what's your structural plan for informing people of that? And then who's responsible to notify the Department of Health if that's required? And then where are you going to isolate those workers? So maybe there's an extra room and bathroom in the house, or if you are going to need to move some people to a hotel in this emergency situation, which you need to be specific about what hotel or motel you would use to isolate workers. You do not need to rent a room. You don't have to have rooms rented for the whole season. You just need to identify where you would reach out to isolate those workers. And then you need to get that well water tested. If you have well water, that has to be tested within 3 months before the occupancy day. So that start date that you're putting on the ETA 790, we're going to ask you for that same date in your online application. And then the water test results cannot be conducted more than they have to be within the 3 months before that. Once you send that in, once we have all your documentation, we will schedule an inspection and come out and inspect the premises. Once you pass inspection, you will receive your certificate Once we receive that certificate, then we go ahead and we notify the Department of Labor that your housing is approved. So I'm going to go over some basic requirements. Before I do that, I just want to note something so that you know that what's happening in the flag system and DOL's flag system, and then what DWD is doing to track your camps and making sure you have the paperwork are two separate systems that don't talk to each other. So the more that you make sure that the information that's provided in that ETA 790 matches what's on your housing application, the easier it's going to be for us to make sure that we have those two things connected, and that we're able to get your federal requirements, your H2A application through the process more quickly, because it's matching what you told us about your migrant labor camp. So just to note. So here are some basic things, some things that might trip people up when they're looking at a new facility or looking at using grandma's house for providing housing to your H2A workers. This is not meant to be like an official enforcement or interpretive list, but this is kind of for training purposes, and it's not comprehensive. So just want to make sure that you know, like, well, Katie told us, but this is just kind of a real basic overview. So housing cannot be within 500 feet of livestock. That includes like chickens who might roam around the yard, ducks. They have to be at least 500 feet from any livestock. You cannot use an RV. So you can't use like a fifth wheeler that you roll up. Cannot use an RV. Everything has to be maintained and in good condition. So, you know, you can't use an old mobile home that has holes in the side and there's floor falling through and the windows are breaking. Everything has to be maintained and in good condition. So another thing that you have to look at is in both state and federal regulations, it requires the certain percent of window space for based on the square footage of the flooring. So in habitable rooms, which are living rooms, dining rooms, and bedrooms, we take the square footage of that room, and then windows have to make up 10% of that square footage. But all of those windows that are counted towards that 10% have to be able to be opened at least 45%. So if you have a giant bay window in your living room that doesn't open, it's just glass, that does not count towards this 10% of windows square footage. So it only counts for windows that can open. The point of the windows is that you can open for ventilation, means of escape, and then the window itself to let light in, so natural light. So just so you know, and then all federal requirements require that all exterior openings have to be screened. So if you can open it, there needs to be a screen. If you need open it to the outside, a screen needs to be on it. That includes your doors. So sometimes you may have a screen storm door, and some houses don't have screen doors. You still need to put some sort of screening. So even those screens that you like can open up, like the ones that like magnetically close, that counts as a screen. So if you don't want to put a screen door on a door, an exterior opening doorway, you could use those. But every exterior opening has to be screened. Some other things to keep in mind. All of the rooms have to be at least 7 feet tall. So if you've got a room that is, you know, you want to use a bedroom upstairs and it has the A-line ceiling, that may not work because unless it meets 7 feet tall in every location, you may not be able to use that. You have to provide a washer, a dryer, and the federal and state require a laundry tub in the same room as the washing machine. So all those things have to be required. Your flooring has to be smooth and rigid so and easily cleanable. So carpeting is not required. You can have a rug or, you can have area rugs. You just can't have the flooring, the makeup of the flooring has to be rigid, smooth finish. So it cannot be carpeted. If you have a second story, 2 stories, you have to have a Class A fire escape on the second floor for workers to get out of. When measuring how many workers you can put in a room, in a house, one of the bigger things we look at is the sleeping areas, and we measure 50 square feet per person. So if we measure a room and it's 160 square feet, you can put 3 people in that room. But you can't say, you can't put 4 people in the room. it's 150 square feet per person. If you want to house, I know a lot of times employers are like, I'm going to bring in male workers. However, if a domestic worker who's female applies and meets the requirements and they need housing, you have to provide that person housing. And so you need to make sure that you know where would be able to house a female worker if they are hired and need housing. The things that you have to have separate for them are they have to have a separate sleeping area and they have to have a separate toilet room and shower room. So you would be able to, if you're able to have one bedroom dedicated and one bathroom dedicated to that female worker, and then the males could use the other bedrooms in the other bathroom. But just keep that in mind. It doesn't happen very often, but you still have that obligation as an H2A employer to hire a qualified female worker, even if you had planned on only having males in your housing. There has to be room for recreation. So you have to have some space for those workers to be able to spend time that's not in their bedroom and not at the kitchen table. So and it has to be available. It has to be available when it's raining. So you can't say, well, we have rec space outside. They can go outside instead of a picnic table. Well, if it's raining, now guess what? Now you don't have rec space because they can't sit outside of that picnic table. So you have to have some indoor space that is available for them to be able to use for recreation. These are, there's H2A posters that you do have to have posted at the camp in English and in the language of the workers. You can find and order these forms from the Department of Labor, and they will send the nice big posters out to you. So English and then whatever the language of your workers are. So maybe Spanish, but it could be any other language that workers may speak. So some timelines and maybe some items for you to consider before you begin your H2A application process. Here are just a couple things that you want to keep in mind. So as you get started, if the work is not going to be full-time during the whole duration of the contract, would it make sense for you to join with another employer and maybe file jointly? So do you have full-time work for, a whole contract? And then who would you work with? I mean, we DWD, we can't recommend an attorney or an agent. So like I mentioned earlier, connecting with other employers who've used the H2A program and just seeing who they've used, pros and cons, and getting feedback from different employers about different agents that they may have used. We can share, and like I said, you can find publicly who the different agents are that are used in Wisconsin if you're interested in kind of seeing what agents or attorneys are out there. Like I said before, make sure your housing is secured. You know where you're going to house workers and that it is ready to go. When we go out and inspect that house, it needs to look like that day that the workers arrive. This is what the housing is going to look like. So you want to make sure that everything is ready when we do the inspection so that we don't have a delay in the process after getting your inspection out, that we can't let DOL know your housing is approved because we're missing things or it doesn't meet the requirements. DOL is going to require that you list all of the vehicles that you are going to use to transport workers. So you need to have those specific vehicles picked out, ready, and insured. This includes like if you give vehicles to workers so that they can drive themselves to the grocery store or that the workers drive themselves to work. Make sure you have an idea of what it is that how are you going to transport those workers? And that needs to be included in the ETA 790. And then think about your timeline. 75 to 60 days from the date of the need is when you file the ETA 790. But if there are some delays in getting visas, if there's some delays in getting your application approved because of housing issues, you may not want to make that the drop dead date, that if I don't have workers by this date, we're not going to be able to do anything. If you can find some work for those workers a few days before, a week ahead of time, it might be good to build that in, because sometimes there are delays based on housing, or sometimes there's some delays based on visas, so that you're giving yourself maybe an extra day or two in there where you can still have work for those workers to do, but it's not going to it's not going to hold your whole crop up if they don't come on that specific day. And then so kind of our combined timeline before you start on your H2A processes, make sure you have that housing in place, like I mentioned, that it meets all of the requirements. Make sure your housing, make sure you're ready for inspection. But, you know, you can send that application in before you have your ETA 790 submitted and flagged. We compare what you put in sometimes we have some issues with what you put in the ETA 790, especially for housing addresses, don't match what you've given us on your migrant labor camp application. So like I said, make sure that those addresses and that information is matching. Work with your agent to make sure that they know. Some downfalls sometimes happen when an employer is going to use 3 houses for their H2As, but they are only going to use 2 for this early application and then 1 for a later application. And so their DOL is waiting for these 3 housing locations to be ready, but the employer only has 2 of them ready, thinking that they have time for the 3rd. Well, now we're trying to figure out what's going on, and this 3rd house that's not ready is delaying that first application. So being clear about which housing you're using for which application and which workers, making sure those housing applications match what's going to be on your ETA 790. Consistency between the 2 of them is going to help all of us throughout this process. Make sure you read those terms and conditions and keep an eye on your email. Everything is done via email. So I know sometimes, especially in agriculture, our employers are out there working, they're in the field, they're not behind a desk. And so sometimes checking email is not something you normally do or doesn't happen as often, but just making sure that you're keeping an eye on those emails, especially during this application process, because that's how we follow up. That's how DOL follows up too. And then Allison had asked that we talk a little bit about what makes a good H2A employer. And so we talked amongst our team of outreach workers and our migrant labor inspectors and some of the things that you can do. Now, none of this is like required. So I don't want to say DWD requires things because we don't. But these are just some thoughts that we've had in talking within our community about what things as an employer you might think about to do if you want to help or support your workers. So one of the things that we kind of hear a lot from partners, agencies, especially in our healthcare partners, is helping workers access community around them. In a lot of studies that come back to us or in meetings we're in, healthcare officials say that oftentimes farm workers struggle with isolation. They're often in rural areas and they don't have a social network. And so, thinking about if there's a local, community center that is like whatever ethnicity your workers or country your workers come from, is there a local community center that also supports those workers, or where maybe permanent residents of the U.S. gather? Can you connect it to them? Or maybe there's a church or other faith-based group that might be helpful for them to connect to. What might your workers be interested in the community that can help them, on their day off, on a rain day, go connect with their community so they're not feeling so isolated? And do they have transportation? Can they get there? Can they get to town? Can they access these things? And then we know too that H2A workers also experience food insecurity. And especially at the beginning of the season and during times of shortage to work. Maybe they send all their money home and forget about how much it costs, and then also they don't have work, and they are also facing food insecurity. So, making sure, how can you support them? Making sure they do have food, connecting with your local food pantry so that they know you have workers who might need to access that food bank as well, and any other supportive services in your community that might be able to help them. Excuse me. And then healthcare is often a concern for H2A workers. They are eligible for a marketplace, so they can get services through the Affordable Health Care Act. So they may not know how to navigate that system, or they may not think that they need it, but maybe conversations with them, talking about how the healthcare plan, the systems in the US are different than other countries. So they may not realize that they need to have some sort of healthcare. If you don't offer it as an employer, how are they going to access healthcare services? Maybe connecting with local public and community health organizations can help you determine what healthcare options are available in your area that they may be able to utilize locally, or maybe they have services to help people navigate marketplace or other low income options. So what else is in your community? Who else might be able to help them with this healthcare question? Because it is one that we hear a lot. And I don't have like an easy answer to this is where you go to get this healthcare. So this is something that you may need to research locally. We also have a group in Wisconsin called Noble Community Clinics that have a mobile health care unit that travels throughout Wisconsin, and they focus on seasonal agricultural workers. So connecting with them too, they often come and provide preventive care to have them stop at your farm or maybe a group of farmers in your area, and then helping your workers access that. And then, when the housing when it comes to housing, another thing that's helpful is providing more of a home life experience, like that you're upkeeping a nice house, that it feels homely and comfortable. Do you provide internet or streaming services? You're not required to provide the internet or cable or streaming services, but that might be something that could be a benefit if you wanted to offer to them. And it might be something that makes them more comfortable and something for them to enjoy. So just generally, H2A workers are from other countries, and so all of the systems are different. Some may purchase vehicles in the US, and so maybe helping them navigate the DMV, or some might be interested in GED or ESL classes. And there are different programs that can help them utilize that in their free time. So being supportive of that or helping them access and navigate some of those programs are other ways that you might be able to support your H2A workers. So here's a QR code if you want to go to our contact page. FLC at dw.wisconsin.gov is our general email box for the H2A program. And then if you go to dwd.wisconsin.gov/migrants, and you see in the left-hand menu, that has there's an option for all of our forms. So if you click on that menu option, it'll give you everything we talked about today, the application, the fire inspector documentation template, postings that you need to put up are all on our website. And then last, here's our contact information. So thanks for those of you who've hung on well after the meeting, hour after the meeting was planned on going. But if you have any questions, go ahead and you can unmute yourself and just ask, or I haven't been able to keep an eye on the chat. If there's anything in the chat that
Well, I just want to jump here quick. Katie, so thank you very much, and I'm glad that you finished your presentation on how you keep your employees happy as well. So basically, we are connected, and that's one of the main things is make sure that those guys wanted to come back and work for you again. So yeah, any questions for Katie and Elena or myself? I mean, write those in the chat, or you just open your microphone and just let's spend the last 5 minutes of Q&A.
And Katie, I've been keeping up with the chat, so I've been responding. Just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. Are there any questions in there that you want to ask out loud for everyone?
I don't see anything coming in yet.
Okay.
So I think with that, probably we can just finish this nice webinar, very informative, and basically what I have seen here, you need to start working first in your housing, get everything ready, right? And make sure that you have enough time. Talking about that, I have a quick question for you that I'm thinking over. Mother nature is unpredictable, right? And sometimes maybe you're gonna have a dry season or a wet season that is gonna affect when you're gonna start your season, right? Is possible like it is that those forms can be changed, or you need to change the ETA forms, like saying, no, I want this person not to start in April, I want to start in May, so I'm gonna move it 1 month. Is that possible, or there has to be a different process? So I just thinking from the producer's standpoint, when I need it, and
Right.
I'm ready for him or for her. So
Right. And that's one where if you're going to know ahead of time, you can, with at least 10 business days before that change of start date changes to notify the Department of Labor and DWD. You can also notify your H2A workers. I believe you just kind of push that start date back with them before you bring them in. But I think the big piece is if there's going to be any issues due to crop changes, which is what kind of the last thing in the terms and conditions. So weather-related things that are going to affect your crop, which is what you're bringing H2A workers in to do. You do have to notify the Department of Labor and DWD, and then that allows you to adjust that start date, basically saying due to these things, we're not going to be able to start this until such and such a date. So you want to notify the Department of Labor and DWD of those changes. But once the workers are here, you can't modify that start time or the end time either.
Okay, no, great. Thank you very much. Well, I think we covered everything. And again, I also put all the links in there in a document. So I'm planning just to send those to Allison, and maybe she can forward those to all the people that attend this very great session about H2A visas. So I really appreciate all the time to everybody. And again, a big thank you to you, Katie and Elena, because this has been a great session. I think this is a good first step at somebody that hasn't done it before, that is doable. And if you do it right, it could be bring good people to work here. So it's a great tool to do it. So okay.
Yes. Yep. All right. Well, thank you all. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
you.
So I'm gonna stop here the chat, and thank you everybody, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Bye bye. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.